Welcome into Tailgate Talk SEC, your one stop for all things SEC football. I'm Will Thomas. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode where we'll be talking about some SEC teams that could be contenders for the playoff that are just not getting enough attention right now for how good they could be. Now, if all I said to you was SEC and playoff, your mind probably goes to teams like Texas, Georgia, Alabama, LSU, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M as teams that nobody would really be surprised if they're able to make the playoff this year given how much talent is on their rosters. But there are four teams in particular that I think are sleeper teams to come out of the SEC and make the playoff that are just not getting enough attention right now. And here's the important thing to bear in mind. With how challenging some of the SEC schedules are and the strength of record that a lot of these teams will have, 9-3 is probably enough for a bunch of these teams to have very, very convincing arguments on Selection Day over a team out of the ACC or the Big 12 or even a group of five. So you don't even need to win. I mean, you could lose a quarter of your games and still make the playoff with how some of these teams are lined up schedule-wise. The first team that I looked at as a sleeper to make the playoff out of the SEC is the Auburn Tigers. Based on where you look, they're about plus 390 to make the playoff on a lot of these sports books, and their win total is set up at 7.5. Now, I think that win total is way too low. Obviously, I'm telling you they can make the playoff. Because their schedule, it is very hard, but it's manageable enough where 9-3 will be good enough to give them a very, very compelling argument when the bracket is set. You look at their week 1 game against Baylor, immediate must-win game. It's an out-of-conference opportunity, and just off the rip, 0-1 is not going to be good for a team that's already on the fringe of really bowl eligibility. Looking at their win-loss, 7-5, you're dancing that fine line of 6 wins. So starting off strong is critical. They have 2 road games back-to-back at Oklahoma and at Texas A&M. If they're able to just go 1-1 in those 2 games, they're set up very well. And they have another pair of back-to-back games at home versus Georgia and versus Missouri. Same story. If they can go 1-1, worst case, split those 2 home games against 2 very good SEC teams, they'll be in a very good spot. Now, me just telling you, if they win their games, they'll make the playoff, that means nothing without actual reasons why they can win their games. I think that Auburn is one of the sneaky, most talented teams in the country because an Auburn roster is simply not going to lack blue-chip talent. It's just not. And you look at, especially their wide receiver room, you have Cam Coleman, who's a former 5-star coming back for his second year at receiver, and they brought in Eric Singleton from Georgia Tech, who got a good bit of attention later on in the year as Tech started to pull some wins. They beat Miami at home. But that guy is one of the best receivers in the country. He's not necessarily, the meanest guy coming off the bus or anything, but he is an incredibly effective playmaker that teams like Georgia were also vying for out of the portal. He is a very good player. And Jackson Arnold transferred from Oklahoma to Auburn, former 5-star quarterback. This is a much better situation for him. I think it'll be sort of a fresh start, new surroundings, get comfortable. I think he's going to have a very good year with those 2 receivers. I also have plenty of faith in Hugh Freeze to get it done in year 3 here. This feels like a pressure year almost, where he needs to put results on the field, or else there will start to be some noise about his job. Over his first 2 seasons, they were not great, but with how Brian Harsin left the program, I don't think that anybody could have gone in there and turned that thing around in less than 2 years. And he's been a little off the grid for a while, but Hugh Freeze is a good football coach. He just is. And everybody knows that when you go back and look at his track record. He is a good, solid football coach, and he's not someone who's going to be going 6-6, 5-7, 7-5 all these years, especially with a team as talented as Auburn is. The bottom line here is that Auburn is a program that is simply not going to stay down for that long. There's too much talent, too much pride at that university for it to happen. And looking at their schedule more specifically, some of their hardest games are home games. They get Bama, they get Georgia, they get Missouri, all at home this year. That place is a war zone for road teams when it's rocking, Jordan-Hare is. So if they can go 2-1 in those home games, I said earlier about splitting Georgia and Missouri, you could do that and find a way to beat Alabama. You go 2-1 in those games at home and take care of your business on the road. Don't lose to teams like Vanderbilt. Win one of your 2 games against Oklahoma and A&M. They're set up very well to end up with 9 wins and be in a spot for a college football playoff bid at the end of the year. The second team that I believe could sneak up on a lot of people and make a run at the playoff are the Florida Gators, who are currently around plus 420 to make the playoff and have a win total of 7.5. The Gators are in a very similar spot to Auburn, where their roster is incredibly talented, and there's no question that with the players they have, that they could win a lot of football games. But looking at Florida's schedule for the second year in a row, they're getting absolutely hammered with the quality of opponents they have to play. They have road games against LSU, which has been confirmed as a night game, a road game at Miami, road game at Texas A&M, road game at Ole Miss, and a road game to Kentucky. They're just not fun to play. They're not fun to play. But if you break down their schedule into sort of segments, you can see how it's possible that Florida can get to 9-3. Take the LSU and Miami games, for example. Those are in back-to-back weeks. What are the odds realistically that Florida goes 0-2 in those two games? The lines are out for those two games actually already, some early lines. LSU is favored by 7 over Florida, and Miami is favored by 5.5 over Florida. Now, obviously, those lines are going to change, probably by a few points by the time game time rolls around. But those are not massive. It's not like they're 2 touchdown dogs in both those games. Those are one-score lines. Florida's going to be wanting to get back at Miami, and Florida LSU games are always absurdly close with the stupidest endings you could possibly imagine. So those games should be very good. And then, and also back-to-back weeks 6 through 7, the Gators host Texas and then go to Texas A&M. Florida could go 2-0 in those two games. If they do that, their playoff odds skyrocket. But realistically, you drop one of those games because Texas is going to be one of the best teams in the country. Although getting them in Gainesville, that's going to be a dangerous spot for the Longhorns. And then at A&M, College Station is just a nightmare for road teams to go into. The final segment of Florida's schedule that they have to split is their game in Jacksonville against Georgia and their game on the road at Ole Miss. Florida really had control of that game against Georgia last year before Lagway went down with the injury, and they beat Ole Miss last year in Gainesville. And now Ole Miss has to replace Jackson Dart with Austin Simmons. We'll see how that goes, and obviously changing home venues will be different for that game. But if they're able to split those two games against Georgia and Ole Miss, split their games against Texas and Texas A&M, and split LSU and Miami, they're set up very well as long as they take care of business at Kentucky and then versus Tennessee and Florida State at home to go 9-3 this year. And the more you look at it, Florida and Auburn are in very similar spots. I've been saying pretty much the same things to you about both these teams. It was a prove-it year for Hugh Freeze, and I think it's also going to be a prove-it year for Billy Napier. He was all but fired a few weeks into last season, but then the guys rallied around him, they turned it around, and they pulled a bunch of upsets and won a lot of games at the end of the year. If they can maintain that sort of energy, there's no momentum across seasons, but the idea of the energy rallying around Napier, support from the university, if they can come out hot this year with a good start, maybe pull an upset at LSU to really get it going in conference play, this team can be incredibly dangerous. The third team that I believe could sneak up and snag a playoff spot are the Oklahoma Sooners, who are currently listed at plus 550 to make the playoff and have a win total of 6.5. Now, this is the lowest win total of any of these projected teams for the playoff, but the injection of offensive talent that Oklahoma got this offseason is going to totally transform that offense coming into this fall. They got Giovanni Gibson, who is a transfer receiver from Arkansas Pine Bluff, who is a lot better than you would think a receiver from Pine Bluff is. They got Jaden Ott, the running back from Cal. And they grabbed John Mateer, who will be their quarterback from Washington State. Now, transfer quarterbacks can kind of be hit or miss, unless you do what Oklahoma did and also brought over his offensive coordinator, Ben Arbuckle, from Wazoo. So those two are familiar with each other. Mateer is an absolute game wrecker. He can be an absolute nuisance and impossible for defenses to plan against. So if Oklahoma is able to bring a legitimate offense to the table, we know that Venables is going to have his defense ready to play. This team could be much more well-rounded and a lot more of a threat to all the other teams in the SEC. Breaking down Oklahoma's schedule, week 2, they get Michigan in their house. Absolutely massive showdown to begin the year, really for both programs, who are trying to prove to the country, they're legitimate. Michigan has less proving to do at this point, it feels like. But week 2 matchup at home, Sharon Moore is apparently coaching for that game. Who knows what's going on with that? If they're able to win that game and set the tone for the rest of the season, they're set up very well. If you're able to go on the road and win at Tennessee, that would be huge as well. The expectations for Tennessee, they're not low, but they're much lower than they were when we all thought that Nico was going to be their quarterback. So Tennessee is a very gettable team. It's on the road in Neyland, which is not easy. I believe that Neyland is easily worth 4 or 5 points in a game. But that is a big win if Oklahoma could get that. And you have Missouri and LSU at home back-to-back in weeks 13 and 14. You cannot lose both those games. You could probably make a case that Oklahoma winning both those games is not that far-fetched at all, which I also believe. But if you go 0-2 in those games, it's absolutely over. Another swing game for Oklahoma's playoff odds when they host Ole Miss in Week 9. Protecting your home turf in the SEC is crucial because winning on the road is damn near impossible. So this is a it's less of a must win and more of a can't lose. Those are similar ideas. But if you lose this Ole Miss game, you put yourself behind the 8 ball, because then all of a sudden you might have to win both of your road games at Tennessee and Alabama to find a way to go 9-3. So that Ole Miss game in Week 9 will be pivotal. And in terms of the Tennessee and Bama game, I already talked about Tennessee, but they have to find a way to, at worst, split those games. Tennessee is by far the more gettable one. But if you drop that game to Tennessee, based on how the rest of your season went, that Bama game on the road in Week 12 might be a must-win. Now, if they win both their home games against Missouri and LSU, that game becomes losable. But we won't know, until Week 9, really, after this Ole Miss matchup, how important that Bama game is going to be. Now, the fourth and final team that I believe could sneak up through the SEC and make a playoff run is one that's getting a little more buzz, but it's South Carolina. They're plus 390 to make the playoff with a win total of 7.5. Now, they're 71st in returning production, but what they do return are two of the most exciting freshmen in football last year in their quarterback Lenore Sellers and defensive end Dylan Stewart. Those two guys, in their own right, are total game wreckers. We saw Sellers scramble for a touchdown on 3rd and 16 last year in Clemson in that upset win on the road, and we saw Dylan Stewart absolutely terrorizing quarterbacks throughout the entire season. Those two guys can be the catalysts for a team that could cause a lot of havoc this year. Similar to Auburn, Carolina opens up with a very pivotal out-of-conference game in Week 1. They play Virginia Tech. And for the same reasons that Auburn needs to beat Baylor, Carolina has got to beat the Hokies. Because if you drop a game out of conference here early on in the year, you have to make that up on the back end in the SEC, which is going to be much harder than beating Virginia Tech. It just is. So going 1-0 is going to be critical. And their 4 conference road games. They go to Missouri in Week 4, LSU in Week 7, Ole Miss in Week 10, and A&M in Week 12. Just do not go 1-3 over that stretch. That's all you have to do there. Can they go 2-2 in those 4 road games? Because none of those road games are back-to-back. So every time they go on the road, they either have a bye week or a home game the next week, which is very big for travel, because going back-to-back road games in the span of 8 days is very challenging. It takes a giant toll on these guys. So having no back-to-back road games is huge. And then 2 of their biggest games of the year are going to be when they get Bama at home in Week 9 and Clemson at home to end out the year in Week 14. I've said it about 100 times already on this show. Just don't go 0-2. Can you get at least one of those games? Clemson is getting a lot of buzz as one of the best teams in the country preseason. Bama's not. Bama is still going to be Bama, but if you're looking at this right now, it feels like Bama is probably the more gettable game out of those two, which sounds kind of weird to say, but regardless, 1-1 in those 2 games, you're okay, and just don't you dare lose one of your home games to Vanderbilt or Kentucky. If you do one of those, I'm going to delete everything that I've said about you so far, because those 2 games, if you want to be a playoff team who can compete with the best, don't you dare lose one of those 2 games. The reasons for optimism go beyond just Sellers and Dylan Stewart. They do have 3 new transfers on the defensive line. One's from A&M, Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy. Xavion Hardy is a JUCO transfer. And Demon Clowney came from Charlotte but was originally at Ole Miss. So you have those 3 guys to go along with Dylan Stewart. If they can mesh early on and start to get to opposing quarterbacks, it'll be dangerous. And they have very minimal turnover on the offensive line. They only have 1 transfer who is at center. It's Boaz Stanley, who's coming in from Troy. But all that consistency on the offensive line is going to make Sellers feel a lot more comfortable. And when he's comfortable, he's very, very dangerous. So those are the 4 teams that SEC fans and fans across the country have got to look out for this fall when it comes to stealing a playoff bid. All 4 of them are dangerous. All 4 of them have the talent to beat just about anybody in the country, and any of them can sneak their way into the playoff.